Welcome back to the Menopause Movement podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Gordon. If you're watching the replay or on YouTube, thanks so much for being a part of the Menopause Movement. Today, we welcome Dr. John Carrozzella as the first male guest on our podcast. Now, Dr. John is a former orthopedist who became a hormone and metabolic specialist when his ex-wife descended into meno-misery. He sought out a treatment, and when he found it, he made it his mission to help as many people as he could with their hormone problems. Now, Dr. Carrozzella is a 1978 honors graduate from Yale. He subsequently earned his MD from the University of Cincinnati in 1982 with the honor of Alpha Omega Alpha. He completed his orthopedic surgical residency and hand surgery fellowship in 1988. And after practicing as an orthopedic surgeon for 25 years, he switched his focus to the non-traditional medical specialties of hormone replacement, sexual health and dysfunction, and age management. Now, over the years, he has been a member of a number of medical associations, which have included the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, American Board of Orthopedic Surgery, the American Society for Surgery of the Hand, and the American College of Surgeons. And now in 2014, Dr. Carrozzella became an advanced fellow of the American Academy of Anti-Aging and Aesthetic Medicine, a member of the International Society for Sexual Medicine and the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health. In August 2016, Dr. Carrozzella was awarded a master's degree in metabolic and nutritional medicine from the University of South Florida. He became a diplomat of the American Board of Anti-Aging and Regenerative Medicine in 2013, and he carries a certificate in sexual medicine from the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, a certificate in advanced endocrinology from the University of South Florida, and a certificate in advanced bioidentical hormone therapy from World Link Medical. He is an expert in hormone therapy, sexual dysfunction, and age management for both men and women. Dr. Carrozzella currently practices in Orlando, Florida, where he devotes his practice to serving the needs of patients with hormonal deficiencies, sexual dysfunction, incontinence, nutritional imbalances, and age management issues. During the podcast, we talk about how he got from orthopedics to hormones, the difficulties involved with practicing medicine in America now, especially as a private practitioner who must interact with insurance companies, treating people, not lab numbers, the signs and symptoms of low testosterone in men and where to go for help, menopause, and weight. Now, stay to the end to find out what he does for sexual rejuvenation in women, how he does it, and the results he sees. At the end of the episode, make sure you visit drmichellegordon.com/podcasts, where you can find the show notes, plus the links to the books and resources mentioned in the episode. And if you enjoy the episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you are always the first to know when each episode is released. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you for all of the 5-star reviews. And if you haven't left a review yet, please take the time to review the podcast with written review. This helps more women find it and get the help they need during the disruption of menopause. No one should have to go it alone. We found that out with the Menomates for sure. We've also created a free online training to help our podcast listeners go from meno-misery, and that's hot, sweaty, sleepless nights, irritable, low mood, feeling like an alien beamed down into control of your body, piling on weight and looking pregnant, or feeling like managing your menopause is a full-time job, to Menomate. And that's a woman who's not bothered by symptoms, happy and content with her life, and even dropping weight and possibly fitting into your pre-menopause clothes. To access that free video training, go to learn.menopausemovement.com/start. And thanks so much for being a part of the Menopause Movement. And now let's get to Dr. John Carrozzella. And I'm joined by Dr. John Carrozzella. John Carrozzella?
You got it. Yep.
Yeah, awesome. So what I find fascinating about you, and the reason I wanted it, first of all, you're the first man to be on the Menopause Movement podcast. So congratulations.
I'm honored. Thank you. Wow.
Yeah. And the other thing is that when I read your brief bio, you told us that you were an orthopedic surgeon. And so I want to know the story of how you went from orthopedic surgeon to women's sexuality and hormone expert, because this is, I mean, orthopods are very different. I'm a surgeon, right? I'm a general surgeon. And how we look at, this is kind of funny. We make fun of you guys, right? So that we look at the orthopedist as, the kind of the mechanics, they fix the bones and that sort of thing. It's like, you got to be the smartest guy in medical school to get into the orthopedic fellowship. You have to be the highest on the test to get into the orthopedic residency, whatever. And then as soon as you guys graduate residency, you forget it all. And there is a fracture. I have to fix it. And that's it. So, and I mean that all tongue in cheek. It's not like you guys aren't smart, but it's really interesting that all of the critical care, all that stuff just kind of goes out the window, and it's just basically, you become a carpenter. So let's hear your story. I'd love to hear it.
Well, you kind of have it right. I mean, I went to the University of Cincinnati, and I was, 95th percentile on my boards, and I was the number one choice of my orthopedic residency. And matter of fact, there were several that wanted me. I looked strongly at San Francisco and a couple of others, but I stayed in Cincinnati because that's where they wanted me. And I was 95th percentile in my in-trainings, and just really did very well in everything that I did. Went out and practiced general orthopedics largely for 25 years, although I did have a fellowship in hand surgery, and I was like the first. Peter Stern came to me way back when, and he ultimately went on to develop one of the top hand surgery fellowships in the country, and he asked me to be his kickoff fellow because of my credentials. So yes, I did do pretty well over time, but I ended up practicing general orthopedics for about 25 years and really just got tired of the call, dealing with insurance companies, the sense of entitlement, and really kind of got burnt out like a lot of people do. Almost got to the point where it's physically challenging to go to work every day. Well, at one day shortly, so actually at one point I actually tried to leave medicine altogether. And while we were going through that transition, my ex-wife went through a rather dramatic menopause. And so we ran around, the neighborhood and went to all these doctors, and we got the usual stuff, which I'm sure, given the title of your blog and website, you have heard the story a million times. Yeah. Get over it. That's the way it is. Put your big girl panties on. This is what life is. Don't do that. It's going to cause cancer, and on and on and on and on, and all of the nonsense that you hear out there in traditional medicine regarding menopause and hormones. Well, we finally found a couple of people, and we went through the creams and a variety of different things and ended up in a pellet office, and it was nothing short of life-changing. The dramatic turnaround I saw in her was just nothing short of stunning. Her vitality came back, her energy came back, her enthusiasm, her sharpness, and my ex was an incredibly brilliant and sharp lady, and when that went away and came back, it was really kind of spectacular to see it related to the hormones. And, I got interested, and so I got approached by a pellet company to do what I call weekend warrior kind of stuff, where you went to a one-day training and learned how to put the pellets in. And after a bit, I started doing it, and I started seeing for myself this dramatic turnaround over and over and over again. But I had a problem with the way that they were teaching it. I would do it, and of course, like anything else, 80% of the people would get better and 20% would have challenges or whatever. And my supervisors at the time said, well, just give more. Well, I had a problem with that. And I really wanted to start to understand more of the physiology and all of the biochemistry. And with my history of being really highly intellectual and all this stuff, being a one-day wonder wasn't good enough for me. So I eventually found the American Academy of Anti-Aging and Aesthetic Medicine and went on to the University of South Florida and got a master's degree in nutritional and metabolic medicine. Ultimately got a certificate in advanced metabolic endocrinology and started doing all of the things that I couldn't stand in medical school, that is physiology and biochemistry and endocrinology, and actually fell in love with it. I have gone on to really become somewhat of an expert in this field. I mentor with a internationally renowned expert named Neil Rouzier, who teaches at an exceptionally high level. And all we do is evidence-based medicine. And everything that I preach in my office, everything that I do is right out of the literature using parameters that you can find in everyday literature, in the endocrinology literature, Maturitas, and you pretty much name it, and I've got references in my library to show that what I do is evidence-based. I really believe in evidence-based medicine. I don't want to do anything that's, that's crazy or weird. Of course, sometimes with some of the sexual rejuvenation stuff that's so cutting edge these days, there's not a lot of big literature on it, but I pretty much try to stay in the literature and stay in command of the literature and be able to defend pretty much anything that I do these days. So it's fun and it's exciting. It's definitely life-changing, not only for myself, but truly for my clients and my patients and the people who come to see me. And it is far more fun than fixing a broken arm, I can tell you that.
So where are you located?
I'm located in Orlando, Florida, and in an
Orlando.
area known as Restaurant Row. We're right near International Drive, where all the tourists go, and right near Bay Hill and Windermere, some of the nicer
Not right now.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah, there's nobody coming now. So I wanted to talk, let me just go back and let's talk a little bit. When did you leave traditional medicine and dealing with insurance companies?
Yeah, sure.
How long
My
ago was that?
last orthopedic case was on January 1st of 2010. I
Okay.
spent about a year and a half outside of medicine looking at other interests. And God made it very clear to me that my calling was a physician. And when he put this hormone challenge in front of me, I was really excited to pick it up and run with it. And it's been totally revolutionary and life-changing for me, as I said.
Yeah, sure. So back then in 2010, I mean, insurance companies were paying a little bit more than they do now. And so what we found, I mean, I don't know if you've seen this, but, my practice is in the process of trying to recoup funds from 2015.
Oh my.
And up, right? And so, what a lot of people don't understand in the medical field in America, the broken system that we have is that, you come into the hospital, say, with a problem, or you come to the office with a problem. So you have a broken arm for you, a gallbladder for me, and we schedule that and we do it. And then the insurance company says, if you have a contract with them, they say, okay, this is what we're going to pay you. And then they often pay you less. And the way that Duc Vong said it on the thing I had with him was like, it's like going out and having $200 or $300 dinner and then leaving after you've had that dinner and then coming back and saying, well, I'm only going to pay you $100 for that. And it's a similar thing, except for, the insurance companies at the end of the day, all they want to do is just not pay. And so we have, so many people that are just dedicated to making sure that the insurance companies do what they're contracted to do. And then if you're not in network, then they make it really, really hard to get paid. And they send checks to patients, and then patients will steal the money thinking that since it's made out to them, it should be theirs. And then you have to sue patients to get the money back, and that makes us look bad. And so there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially when it comes to out of network. And the reason why people are out of network, doctors are out of network, is because insurance companies won't contract with the little guys for a decent amount of money. And so if you only have one doctor or two doctors or three doctors in your practice, and you're only covering a certain number of lives, the insurance companies have the power to say, well, we're only going to pay you 50% of what Medicare pays. And there's zero control. And so I just don't think that the public really understands how difficult it is to be an independent doctor. And then with all the MBAs who have come into medicine, with all the mergers that have happened and the big bloat in administration, it has ruined healthcare. And that has become so evident in this coronavirus pandemic in America, and the fact that we're having trouble getting PPE, and we're having trouble, making sure that people are actually coming to work at the front lines, and then they're paying nurses more than they pay doctors. So this isn't just trying to get into a political argument about this, but it's more that, we've got a broken system, and COVID has really proven how broken it is. And so I'm hoping that we'll fix it. But you did say something about entitlement. And when you say that, you mean entitlement by the insurance companies or entitlement by patients?
Well, I mean actually by both, but it's kind of like this. Okay, I remember back several years ago when I had a patient come in, and he had chopped off the tip of his thumb or something, and I took him to the emergency room and fixed him up. And he came in a couple of weeks later, and he said, "Doc," he said, I can't thank you enough. He says, "I don't have any money. I can't pay you. But you know what? You made it so I could go back to work and take care of my family. Nothing better than that. I could care less if I got paid from somebody like that, okay? But the entitlement that you get is someone, a guy comes in at, I remember a case, a guy came in at 2 o'clock in the morning. He was drinking. He decided to mow the lawn. He slipped his foot under the lawnmower. And so I had to go in and clean it up. And the guy came in and, and he says, you were on call. You had to do that. And he just approaches it like totally with no thankfulness or whatever, even though he can't, pay. It's like, well, I expected that. That's what you're supposed to do. You make too much money anyway. And with kind of touching a little bit on what you said before, with people not understanding what's involved in, the delivery of medical care and the reimbursement. So you just got that sense of entitlement from some people that came in, couldn't pay, weren't going to pay, and couldn't even express some appreciation.
Right.
It's like, I'm totally generous. And if someone just acknowledges that, I did something nice for them, I'll work with them or write it off or whatever. It's just, it got too often. And then the same thing you said about the checks, when I've had that happen when I used to take insurance, the checks would go to the patient and you knew they cashed it, and then you go, well, where'd the money go? And they go, same thing you said. And now here you are suing them, and you go, goodness gracious, didn't you know that's not yours and was supposed to come to me for taking care of it? So
yeah.
those kind of things. And then, that insurance company hassle it's just so nice not to be dealing with that anymore.
Right. I completely agree with you. And the way we've been handcuffed in terms of HIPAA and in terms of, just not being able to, do normal business, with what happened in the 80s with the Star Clause and things like that. And so I think that there's a big change that's going to come out of this COVID crisis, but I don't know that I will survive medicine to see its benefits, but the younger people may. And, we see these, where we consolidate and then we break up, and we consolidate and then we break up. I mean, this is just the natural order of a capitalistic society. And so, at the end of the day, as long as people get care, I think it's good. But the problem, I think, in terms of entitlement comes from, when pain control became a right, and that's when the opioid crisis got started. And then hospitals treating patients as if they're in a hotel, and people thinking that, in America, when they come to the hospital, that it's all about the way that we serve them, instead of the fact that they're sick and we're taking care of them and we want them to get out so that they can go home and live their lives. So there's a lot of issues there, and this is probably pretty polarizing. So we can move on to talking about hormone pellets.
Absolutely.
So how did you get, so you say that you took this 1-day course and you started doing hormone pellets and you tried it on your ex-wife and she had a dramatic change. So what's the process? How do you administer? How do you decide what kind of lab tests do you do? That sort of thing.
Sure. Well, the thing about hormone therapy, and particularly in menopause, is when people are in menopause. Okay. I mean, you just know. I mean, they're in the United States, age 51 is the average age of onset of menopause, and it's defined by 12 months without a menstrual cycle, and it's usually accompanied by a pretty standard constellation of symptoms. And I like to tell people I don't treat lab tests, I treat people. Okay. And the reality is when you see that 51-year-old woman who fits that description, they're not making estrogen, more precisely estradiol. They're not making progesterone. They're not making testosterone, and more than likely they have a significant degree of thyroid resistance or some kind of thyroid imbalance, regardless. And so, I know exactly what the plans are going to be based upon the way they present. And I think it's really important to point out that, I'm old enough to remember Marcus Welby, and for your younger listeners,
I remember Marcus Welby.
I don't ever remember in an episode of Marcus Welby when he looked down and said, the lab test says I need to do this. He never did that. And the first day I went to medical school, they said to me, ask the patient what's wrong with them and they will tell you. And that's kind of the way that I run my practice. I learn about these syndromes and these complexes of symptoms that lead to a particular diagnosis. And then I treat that diagnosis and I use the labs as confirmation. So what we'll often do is, we get the baseline levels and I'll go over them and I'll pretty much explain that they're standard, but I want to come back to hormone levels very specifically because we need to understand that very clearly. So I'll pretty much be able to understand and recommend a treatment plan based upon just the story. Now, we do get the baseline levels because I want to know that we started at one point and we got to another point. And I want to show that we advanced or changed the level of those hormones. And then at the end of the day, the blood level is more important in telling me where that patient feels balanced rather than having that number be the destination. Let's take testosterone, for example, because that's really poorly understood. I'll first describe it in men, and then I'll talk about it more specifically in women. You know, the standard range for testosterone in men is about 250 to about 1100. And even that is changing because when we define normal, it's a statistical collection of numbers where they just create a mean and then go 2 standard deviations out. And that normal has actually been lowering over the last 50 years because the herd testosterone levels in men have been falling for a variety of reasons that I think are beyond the discussion for today. But in reaction, the labs have been lowering that upper level of testosterone when there's tons of literature out there to suggest that men perform more poorly at lower levels of testosterone and are more prone to the diseases of aging at lower levels, okay? So what we do is we define this normal range, and yet we find that when we administer testosterone as a supplement, which we often have to call it, when you're giving it to them in the normal range, that is, we're not treating low testosterone. Low testosterone in men is defined as 2 separate measurements of testosterone drawn before 8 o'clock in the morning, accompanied by the symptoms of low testosterone. So that's the only conditions in which you can make that diagnosis. And I'd say that 90% of the men that I treat don't have a diagnosis of low testosterone, yet they have a symptom complex that responds dramatically when you use testosterone off-label as a supplement to improve the symptoms. And you can go to the literature over and over again, find out that men that are below 900 have a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's disease, and that as you go down in those numbers, all kind of things from erectile dysfunction to mental clarity to dementia, type 2 diabetes, all of these go up in incidence. And when you use testosterone in those situations, they get better.
So let me just ask you a question really quick. For the women who are looking to maybe help their husbands, okay, or their partner who is a man, what do they want to look for a man who has low testosterone or the symptoms of low testosterone that might need some supplementation?
Oh, absolutely. Very, very simple. They have low energy, fatigue. The couch calls their name at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They feel like they're losing it at work, in the boardroom, or in the executives are falling behind the younger guys. They're taking 2 to 3 days to recover from their workouts instead of 1 or 2. Their strength is decreasing. Their muscles are wasting. They're getting visceral fat buildup, particularly around the abdomen. Their sexual function declines. Their ability to achieve erections and orgasm goes down. And so they're just a whole constellation of things. Just a guy that feels like he's turning into the grumpy old man. That's kind of the way we describe it.
For a man who is looking for some help, I mean, who's not in the Orlando area, can they go to the urologist, or where do they go to get some help?
Yeah, you really got to be careful because way too many doctors are looking at those normal ranges, and you get guys come in with all of the typical symptoms and a testosterone level of 400 or 500, and they're going to say, no, you don't qualify. Well, technically they don't, because they don't have that diagnosis. So you really need to go to somebody who actually specializes in hormones, that understands the application of hormones to the degree where you're looking at an optimal result, not a normal result. Because a normal 60-year-old guy is going to be run down, cranky, forgetful, have poor erectile function, and that's not what I don't want to be normal. I want to be optimal. That means taking the levels a little bit higher. And particularly when you talk about women and testosterone, they have a lot of the same type of symptoms. Their libidos go down, their interest in life goes down, their sexual function goes down. With women, that normal range may be, say, from 0 to 50. But we find that where women respond the best to testosterone is when you take those levels up to 100, 150, 250, or even higher. Okay, and when you look at work by a breast surgeon in Dayton, Ohio, with results published in Maturitas, she shows that Rebecca Glazer is her name. I don't know if you've ever heard her name. No. She shows that the higher the level of testosterone, and that is testosterone levels in women over 400, which are almost astronomical if you think about it in terms of an absolute number. Yet you can reduce the risk of breast cancer by over 75% in her series. And her series has been validated in other centers in the United States and in Australia. So this is valid medicine that shows that testosterone is a phenomenal substance for women, and yet the FDA doesn't even recognize it as a substance that's available to women in the United States.
Well, you can get it in, bioidentical form.
You can, but it's off-label. And I mean, like I say, there's no FDA. There used to be FDA-approved compounds, not compounds as compounded medicine, but FDA-approved substances for women, but they were withdrawn from the market several years ago, and particularly after the so-called cardiac scare in testosterone in men, which is just a bunch of baloney, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, the other thing is that the physiology of women is very different from the physiology of men. And the biggest beef I have with the medical community is that they never did any studies on women until recently.
Absolutely.
And so, especially when it comes to heart disease. And so the medical community just decided that, we only have to test men. And that is just typical, patriarchal thought.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. You look at a medicine out there, the flibanserin, which is a trade name Addyi for women. And the history of that substance is just horrendous. It cost more than twice the amount to bring a drug to market than almost any other drug. It had been up for phase 3 trials on several occasions, and the FDA shot it down. And the final thing that was just absolutely ridiculous is when it was finally approved, it had a black box warning on it, and it had a REMS warning, which you actually had to counsel a woman against drinking alcohol, and they had to sign a waiver saying that they wouldn't take alcohol when they use this medication. What does Addyi do? It's a libido enhancer, okay? And so the hang up with the FDA is they said, well, when you're talking libido and sexually oriented drugs, we need to know the interaction with alcohol because sex and alcohol goes together. And so they set out parameters for the alcohol measurement in women. And it turned out that they could not get a study where they could get enough alcohol into women to test the drug adequately with numbers enough. So what they did is they turned around and they went to men, gave it to men. They could get to alcohol levels in their blood that made the test valid. And they found out when they did it in men that they were having episodes of forgetfulness and amnesia and syncope. So they put a black box warning around the women's dose, even though they could never get them to drink enough alcohol to induce the symptoms that the men were having. Do you want to talk about a patriarchal process? You got it right there. And it's just amazing that they went through that. They finally, I believe just recently, they removed that black box warning, which is almost unheard of. But it's just incredible what Addyi went through to get to market.
That's crazy. So do you prescribe that, the Addyi?
I do from time to time, but it's extremely expensive, and I can do a lot better with testosterone, which is cheaper and more customizable. So sure. I like being able to have things in my toolbox that I can tailor to a particular person's needs, and I get really, really good response with testosterone in women. There'll be I'd say maybe 1 in 50 are interested. Well, can I do this with an FDA-approved thing? I go, okay, here. Or even sometimes I've had women that are having trouble getting that sexual response with testosterone alone, and I've used it as a second line for that. And so it's useful, but it's expensive. And like I said, I can do better with testosterone for the most part.
Menopause symptoms are huge, and people complain about hot flashes and mood swings and just, overall feeling of low mood and that sort of thing. But one of the biggest complaints that women have is weight gain and not recognizing themselves anymore. And the weight just starts to pile on. I'm starting to look pregnant. I don't understand what's going on and why is all this weight coming? And that's one of the biggest things. And so what has been your results when it comes to weight loss for these women that you're using?
Yeah, that is huge. I mean, one day does not go by when we're dealing with weight by multiple of my patients, okay? Mm-hmm. And it's very clear. But see, my belief, I'm an advocate of Jeffrey Fung, who's written some really good stuff on this. I'm a true believer that the reason why people gain weight is because their insulin and sugar metabolism gets out of whack. And that in order for that insulin and sugar metabolism axis to work properly, we must be balanced in our other hormones, that is testosterone, estradiol, and thyroid. And there's tons of literature that shows that interaction with those. And that's why you see a lot of women say, doctor, I turned 45 and all of a sudden I started gaining weight and I didn't change my exercise routine. I
Right.
didn't change the way that I eat. What's happening is the way that they're handling the carbohydrates that their body used to be accustomed to dealing with, they can no longer handle those carbohydrates in the same way. And so what happens is we start to get what's called insulin resistance, but it's really not. It's really sugar excess. That excess of sugar relative to what our body's capability is starts to exceed our body's ability to metabolize it. And we end up storing all of that sugar. It goes through the triglycerides and then it goes to fats. So what I'm very clear to tell patients in my office is hormones are not a weight loss program, but hormones done properly can restore your body's natural physiology so that when you do the things that are necessary to lose the weight, you can lose the weight. Because now what you have to do is you have to get your body in an instance when those insulin levels decline and you're able to mobilize that weight. Because the key is managing that insulin sugar axis to make sure that your insulin drops so that your body's need for energy develops, you can mobilize that fat. Because the problem is when you have so-called insulin resistance, you'll get hungry or you'll get whatever, your body will need some energy. And the only place that your body can get energy when your insulin levels are high are by eating. You're not mobilizing. The people that I find in my office that manage their hormones, we optimize their thyroid, we get them on a good protocol, and we get them into a protocol where they're eating 2 meals a day, 20% carbs, 80% fats and proteins. You have that 16 hours a day where you can really drop those insulin levels down. Those are the people that learn how to mobilize their fat. And if you do that and adhere to that, you'll probably get about a 90% effectiveness rate. And those remaining 10% of the people, sometimes they're going to have problems with chronic inflammation, gut inflammation, toxicities, or some other type of metabolic blockade that's preventing them from losing the weight. So when it gets to weight loss of age or the weight gain of aging, it's almost always related to hormone imbalance. You got to get those hormones balanced, and then you've got to manage the insulin and sugar metabolism system. I mean, the studies are out there. 99% of the weight loss programs that don't pay attention to insulin metabolism will fail in the long run, and the people will either gain back all or more than their weight and then they lost beforehand. So it's
we know that diets don't work, right? We know that if you're going to diet, and once you stop dieting, you're just going to gain weight again. So if you want to lose weight, it's a lifestyle change. You talked about Jason Fung. He wrote the Obesity Code. He's a proponent of intermittent fasting. And for anybody who's listening to this, you can go back and listen to my podcast with Diane Parham, which talks about today's fasting for intermittent fasting for today's aging woman, where she found that the way to really help women, older, 45 and up or so, is a 20-hour fast. And that was her result. And then also there's another podcast that I did called, which intermittent fasting method is right for you. And that's all about the different types of intermittent fasting. But what I think that if somebody doesn't want to take anything, so if they don't want to go for, a little pellet, or they don't want to have any, even a cream, one thing that intermittent fasting can do is it can actually balance things out on its own. And intermittent fasting is very, very powerful. And Jason Fung talks a little bit about that. But the main thing, I think, when it comes to fasting is that, when you get off of sugar and you really pay attention to the labels and really pull most of your energy from fats and proteins, the clarity that comes is amazing.
Yeah, I agree. There are many, many of my patients who have gotten off of carbs, gluten to begin with, and then carbs as a follow-on. They come in and go, I can't believe I could be this clear again. It really is remarkable and spectacular.
But the problem is, of course, hunger, and we're not used to being hungry as a society. We're still in the midst of the greatest nutritional experiment that's ever happened since the 70s, since Ansel Keys. And so, what we have is there's a lot of religious type beliefs around diet. And, this works for that person, that works for that person, and nobody really knows. And it really is culty. There's like culty diet, oh, you've got to eat according to your blood type, or you have to eat, according to this guru, or you have to be vegan and eat all this vegan crap that's filled with, vegetable oil. And at the end of the day, I mean, I think when it comes to inflammation, especially, inflammation is like really dependent on what we put in our mouths. And Hippocrates said it best, let food be thy medicine, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It all starts with food.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time looking at food and food sensitivities and the inflammation. And obviously, we all know about the potential impact of food on Hashimoto's. And, 90% of Hashimoto's is probably food related.
Yeah.
So, it's a big deal for sure.
Have you seen Hashimoto's reverse in your patients when you change their diets?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If you can identify a food trigger, and, of course, one of the things we talk about a lot in functional and integrative medicine is these environmental triggers that will activate these autoimmune disorders. If you can identify that trigger and withdraw that trigger, DNA that produces that immune response will fold back upon itself and it will reverse, okay, in many cases. Now, I can't say that that's every case you're going to do that, because either A, you may have just a pure autoimmune expression, or you may not have identified that environmental trigger, but you can reverse. And I have seen Hashimoto's reversed by getting people on clean, healthy nutritional programs that exclude their food triggers. And I've also found low dose naltrexone to be relatively helpful as well. So good food counseling, identifying inflammatory foods, removing those food triggers, and low dose naltrexone can be an effective prescription for Hashimoto's.
What is the most common food trigger that you see with Hashimoto's?
No, without a question, gluten. So I mentioned that 90% of Hashimoto's may be food related, and out of that, 75 to 80% is probably gluten.
Well, it's interesting because, in Japan, gluten is protein that's eaten separately. So I think we have to also pay attention to the fact that it's probably American gluten and not necessarily international gluten, because of the GMO, all of the ways that we have genetically modified our food source here.
For sure. A great reference on this is a book called Wheat Belly. Okay, and I'm sure
yes, I've heard of Wheat Belly.
He goes into original wheat had like 14 chromosomes in it. Okay, well, the wheat we eat in the United States has got like 50, approaching 50 chromosomes. Of course, they wanted to make it shorter and thicker stalks so the wind doesn't blow it over, and more fruit at the top. And while it takes $1 billion to get a drug through the FDA, the way you get food through the FDA is you cut off a wheat stalk, you bring it in the FDA, go, here's wheat, and they go, yeah, it looks like wheat, you can sell it. I mean, and that's about what happens. And so the proteins in the gluten that we eat today are so foreign to the human body. That's why we have the reaction. And I've had a patient that could not eat American gluten, but when they would go to Europe and eat European gluten, which was more tightly restricted, they had no problem with it. So it's
that's really a really interesting, point, because when you go to France, I mean, everybody eats bread in France. Bread is like life there, and it doesn't affect me the same way when I eat bread there. So, it's hard to like go to France and not eat bread or eat a croissant or, something like that. So it's just really very different. But what about like Roundup Ready? I mean, we see so much that, that has Roundup actually genetically programmed into it. And Roundup is what, a glyphosate, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. If you go back into the 1970s, what was really bothering the medical community at that point was the rapidly rising rate of obesity and type 2 diabetes. And so the curve is ascending at a particular rate. And right around the middle of the 1970s, three things happened. One, GMO wheat that was so-called Roundup Ready, the application of just widespread glyphosate so that they could come in and just spray the wheat fields and the wheat would still grow. And at the same time, we went to a carb-heavy nutritional program.
Yep.
So it was like a perfect storm. So we had all of these things came together, and all of a sudden this obesity type 2 diabetes curve that they were trying to modulate goes like this. Instead, the exact opposite happened of what the powers that be were trying to happen.
Well, let's remember that, back in the 50s, the sugar industry quashed all the evidence-based research that said that sugar was responsible for heart disease. And they decided to blame it all on fat because Ansel Keys made a decision based on his thoughts. I mean, there was zero truth behind it. And still the cardiologist, the American College of Cardiology, still says eat a low fat diet. even still, after all this research that shows that if you have Dr. Kate Shanahan, who wrote a book about nutrition called Deep Nutrition, and I think she's just come out with a new version of it, but she says nature doesn't make bad fats. So any natural fat is okay. And what the research has shown is that these natural fats will increase the size of the LDL particles and make them much more fluffy, and so that they don't stick. And when they don't stick, you don't get plaques. And when you don't get plaques, you don't have heart disease, and you don't have carotid artery disease, and you don't need surgery, and you don't need stents. And I mean, stents are a whole nother thing that we could talk about. Oh, but I mean, I have a whole thing with dairy. Dairy is the perfect food for a baby cow, but at the same time, it's not horrible because it's a natural fat, but we are still the only species that eats another species' milk, which is, I mean, if you're going to cut something out of your diet, probably the first thing to do is cut out wheat from America. But then, the next thing would be, manufactured fats, and then probably dairy.
I
you're still having trouble.
I mean, you are right on the way that I think, and the way I think that the really informed physicians are starting to understand nutrition and weight loss and weight management. And I don't call it weight loss. I call it weight management. And I would rather,
yeah.
One of the things that I impress upon my patients all of the time is, listen, I want you to be at an ideal weight, but people feel bad when they're overweight.
Right.
And they get this image in their head that if I could lose 50 pounds, I would feel better. So they equate the way that they feel with what they weigh. And what I find so many times is I say, well, listen, let's do this. Let's get you feeling healthy. Let's get your physiology in tune. And then let's see what your weight comes out to be. Because really, as long as you're being aware of visceral fat, axial fat is not as bad. People, once they feel better, they think they want to lose 100 pounds. Then they lose 40 pounds and they're feeling like $1 million. They go, you know what, I feel pretty good. I look pretty good. I'm happy. I've lost weight. My husband's happy again. And it's more of an overall global thing that makes people feel that they've got to lose weight. But when they get to the point where they're healthy and vital and active, the focus on that number isn't as profound because they're lighter with healthier. And when they're healthier, but not necessarily as light as they want, they go, no, I'm good now.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I mean, I think at the end of the day, a lot of it has to do with how we feel. And when we're able to look at ourselves in a different light, plus minus hormones, when we can look at ourselves in a different light, then we can start taking action that is going to give us the results that we want. And so one of the things, I have a program called the Minnow System, and we take women from minnow misery to minnow mate. So, women who are really bothered by symptoms, hot flashes, sleepless nights, mood disorders, weight gain, those sorts of things. And we move them into, the minnow mate way of living, which is, somebody who doesn't really have any, bothered by symptoms. And what we're seeing is these massive weight losses, 40, 50 pounds, but it isn't really about the weight loss. Just like you said, it's really about how they feel about themselves. And the fact that, once they make these changes, they want to get up and move more. It's so funny to see, like, from the beginning when people are like, oh, I just have to sit on the couch. And then when they start making some of the changes that we recommend, it's like, all of a sudden I'm out and I'm active and I'm feeling really good about myself. And I don't know where all this energy is coming from and that sort of thing. And, my story is that, I all of a sudden I gained like 50 pounds and I went through, I'm a doctor, right? So I'm like, what the hell is happening? And I went to, my wife is a doctor and she's an integrative medicine physician, right? And I'm like, what the hell is happening to me? And she's like, oh, you just got to wait it out. And I'm like, I don't want to wait it out. And it wasn't that bad. I mean, she did give me some advice. We did change our diets and things. So I don't want to bash her. But then I went to gynecologist and they just wanted to give me hormones. So I took hormones and then I got a period and I was like, I'm not interested in having periods again. I didn't have periods on purpose, for a long time. So I was like, this isn't going to work for me. So I kind of spent a lot of time just researching and putting together things that worked for me that I didn't have to take any hormones. And, my result is a 50, 60 pound weight loss and I'm still losing. So I had gained a lot after having a baby that I just never lost. And so now that I'm, feeling a lot better, after making all these lifestyle changes, all I want to do is, share the good news.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's a remarkable story. But specifically getting into the hormones, I mean, there's no doubt that when you look at hormones and their relationship to disease as we age, there's a direct correlation. I mean, there's a 5 times increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. You can cut cardiovascular risk by over 50% by being hormonally balanced. I mean, you can reduce the risk of breast cancer by elevating testosterone levels. You improve type 2 diabetes. So, I mean, hormones are so beneficial to our overall physiology that, when I was learning marketing and things like that, when I was in business school, they say, okay, well, there's riches and niches, and what you got to do is, you can't ever have a product that everybody should be taking. And yet when I look at hormones, I go, clearly that is a product that everybody should be taking to optimize their vitality and their wellness as they age. So it's crucial in so many things. I mean, there's this big 10,000 person study called the Cache County study on hormones and the development of Alzheimer's dementia. And it clearly shows that women that are balanced in hormones have a 80% reduction in the risk of dementia. Now, we spend gazillions of dollars trying to treat dementia. Well, okay, why don't we spend a couple of small dollars and prevent 80% of it? And then, we have less of a problem to deal with. And these
right.
people,
I think the body does have the ability to heal itself. And while balancing hormones is, that's an industry belief. And, I think that we don't want to discount the fact that some people, some women can't take hormones, but they can still get balanced by making lifestyle changes. I don't want to say that everyone should take hormones, because you don't have to necessarily take an exogenous hormone or hormone outside of yourself to experience some sort of transformation. So it's just a matter of making some changes. I mean, like me, I didn't want to take any hormones. I mean, I sometimes take testosterone, but I forget to put it on, and it's just, but that's why you have the pellet, right?
that's why I have the pellet. Don't get me wrong. I do all of the techniques. Okay. I mean, I'm really facile with pellets, creams, injections, whatever it takes. I find people do best on the pellets, and that's why I, prefer the pellets. But people are individuals, and some people don't like sticking that thing in their butt every 3 months. So, I mean, you got to do what the people want in order to make sure that they're getting the benefits of the treatments that they'd like to have.
So when it comes to the pellet, do you formulate it first for them, or do you just have pre-formulated pellets?
Each individual's dose is individualized.
Okay.
But what we do in stock is we have testosterone, we have 12.5 milligram increments. So we can, build them up to whatever dose they need, and similar for estradiol, mix and match to get their personalized dose. So it is customized, but they're in pre-formulated pellets that we mix and match to get the doses that we want.
And so you create one pellet for the patient every 3 months?
Well, it's not necessarily one. I mean, let's say, somebody needs 137.5 milligrams of testosterone. You might use 87.5 and a 50, or 100 and then 100. So they would get 2, but they would be getting that. And then, of course, they would need their estradiol. So that would be 3 tiny little pellets about the size of a grain of rice, or even much smaller than that. It's inserted through the same kind of device that many women have seen to insert their progesterone birth control pellets under the skin in their arm. Same thing.
Okay. Do you use an ultrasound machine when you put it in?
No. It's a pretty simple procedure. It's just a little bit of local anesthetic, tiny little 2 or 3 millimeter nick in the skin. The device goes in. The whole thing in women takes about 2 or 3 minutes, and for men, maybe 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay. And you put it in the subcutaneous fat in the buttock?
Yep. For women in the buttocks. Men, we've just changed to the flank, because men get obviously a great deal more hormone, and that flank spot tends to be a little bit more protected and out of the way than the butt. And it allows them to get back to their vigorous athletic activities faster.
So would you put, if you had a woman who was really vigorously athletic, because a lot of women are vigorously athletic like me, would you put it in the flank for her?
Well, then you get into the cosmetics of it, okay? I mean, I would if she had requested it there and understood that there would be a visible scar. But I mean, I'm in Orlando, and I deal with a lot of Brazilians, and the last thing you want to do with a Brazilian is put a visible scar on their thong line, and they'll about have your head off.
And one of the things that I know my audience is going to want to know is like, what does it cost to get a consultation with you? And then what does it cost for an every 3 month kind of pellet?
Yeah, we try to make it as cost effective as possible. I mean, initial hormone consultation with me for an hour and 15-minute evaluation is $295. And then we build programs based off of a kind of a recurring thing to kind of spread out the cost over the year. So people pay so much every month so that, there's really nothing there. And for that, they get access to me by phone, by email, by video link, by whatever, pretty much whenever they need an appointment. So once they're in kind of our program, there's no fees on a per click basis, which really makes it easy and affordable since we don't do any insurance. Now, every program is going to be a little bit different because everybody needs different things. Or they need weight management, they need, or are they going to do some sexual rejuvenation procedures or whatever. But I would say a basic hormone program is about $200 to $300 a month on the lower end from women, on the higher end for men, and then depending upon what else we bolt on top of that. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of different things that we do to help rejuvenate people.
So you have a subscription model?
Yes.
Okay. So you have a subscription model that's similar to concierge medicine, but it's different because you're not doing primary care, you're doing hormone
Exactly.
care.
Exactly.
All
and
right.
they essentially get the same type of concierge. I mean, we're very responsive. We touch our patients frequently. We encourage them to call. I don't want people sitting out there having issues going on that are unaddressed. So we're very proactive about making sure people call in, and you know how it is. You'd rather have them call you up and deal with a problem when it's simple than sit there not being able to get a hold of you and have to deal with a major problem.
Or show up in the ER unannounced.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it works very well. So we promote that kind of culture. And
that's good. Yeah. So they have pretty much unfettered access to you. They'll text you, they'll call you, they'll email you, and they'll be able to get a hold of you.
Yep. They get a hold of me.
Yeah, that's kind of nice. So, at $300 a month, that includes the drugs as well?
It includes, it includes everything. It includes all the hormones, for the women, it includes estradiol, progesterone, and their testosterone. Thyroid is a little bit variable, so that one we usually send out to the pharmacies, but we do use a natural thyroid product, either Nature Thyroid, NP, or I'm not particularly fond of Armor because it's owned by Knoll, also owns Synthroid. And Knoll went out and bought, about 2 or 3 years ago, Knoll went around the world and bought all of the pig farms that were making thyroid and shut them down. And so they created a severe shortage in worldwide ingredients for thyroid, okay? Well, you can't just go to Indonesia and open up a pig farm. You have to open up the farm. You have to make sure that it's healthy. You have to bring the FDA in. The FDA has to prove it. So it took about 2 years to readjust the thyroid supply chains. It's really an evil thing by Big Pharma, what they did.
Yeah, I had a really hard time with Armour Thyroid. When I changed my diet and I was taking Armour Thyroid, I started getting like palpitations.
Yeah,
Armour, I got rid of it and started taking Synthroid, and it was better.
Yeah, Armour is a very dirty composition, okay? And everybody knows it. There's so many byproducts and ingredients in Armour that I dislike it for a number of reasons. Primarily because it's a dirty collection. And when you get into Nature Thyroid or WP Thyroid, they're far more cleaned up and reprocessed to where they're more and more just T4 and T3.
That's good. Let's just briefly, we only have a little bit of time left, but let's talk a little bit about sexual rejuvenation. Are you like injecting the G-spot? Is that what you're doing? You're using a little bit of something there?
Yeah, well, we use platelet-rich plasma for women, and we are licensed OSHOT provider. And so basically, and we do use, everybody calls them stem cells, but pretty much true stem cells are not available in the United States. So we're careful. I pretty much call it cellular derived growth factors, which are further enhanced over platelet-rich plasma. But we do use these two substances and inject the area around the periurethral area and the clitoris. And we get really good responses in terms of improving sexual responsiveness, lubrication, big responses in terms of stress incontinence. We see far better results when it's done in combination with hormone therapy, because obviously that testosterone is going to tighten up those pelvic muscles in and of itself. So, you do that, you do the O shot or the whatever. And we're also using radio frequency. That radio frequency is also very good. So I kind of liken it like this. You're stirring up the embers, when you do the hormones, okay? And then when you put the O shot in there, it's like squirting a little bit of lighter fluid on top of it. And then when you add the cellular-derived growth factors, it's like putting an atom bomb on top of that. So there's
Wow.
multiplying effect as you go through the various processes, okay? And we find really, really good results in hormone-balanced women that do the radio frequency, that then do either the O shot or the combined with cellular-derived growth factors.
So when we get platelet-rich plasma, that's really just derived from the patient's blood. So you draw the patient's blood, you spin it down, you take the plasma out, and then you use that as injectable. But I'm sorry, but the thought of a needle in my clitoris is, no.
Yeah, truly.
No.
There are people who will bypass that recommendation, but we were very, very good at getting it numbed up. We use a topical cream to get started, and then
Okay.
we specific nerve blocks that help create a numb environment. So while probably it wouldn't be the first thing you did on in preparation for a Saturday night, it is something that women do, and at the long run does tend to mitigate whatever discomfort to get started.
Are you blocking the pudendal nerve then?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. That's really cool. Well, on that note, how do people get a hold of you?
Well, they can reach us at our website, and our website is really, really easy. It's www.hormonesandwellness, all spelled out, so hormonesandwellness.com. And we're in Orlando, Florida, and it's easy to find me, Dr. John Carrozzella, at the Florida Center for Hormones and Wellness.
That's great. Well, John, thanks so much for coming on the Menopause Movement podcast. This has been great. And if we get a lot of questions, we'll bring you back. I think
Awesome.
this is really great. I have, just for anyone, who was really interested in the sexuality part, remember, we've got The Power of Pleasure with Julia Lally. And we also had a whole session about the jade egg. So that's something else for everyone to listen to. So Dr. John, thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, if you have questions about the topics covered in this or any other podcast, I invite you to open a conversation with me via email at info@menopausemovement.com or on Facebook Messenger through my Facebook page at Dr. Michelle Gordon. That's DrMichellellegordon. I also want to invite you to join in our next beta group. Here at the Menopause Movement, we are always trying out new methods of teaching and the best ways to get on top of your menopause symptoms. We regularly run beta test groups where we create a learning experience valued at $2,000, but at no cost to you, in exchange for feedback and testimonials. To get notified of our next beta group, simply sign up at beta.menopausemovement.com. And thanks so much for being a part of the Menopause Movement. I appreciate you.